This is the lecture for Ancient and Medieval History for Tuesday, the 2nd of November, 2021. And the last time we were here, we talked about the systems of trade, which exchange goods and services, and include theft, not a very good one, barter, which is the direct exchange of goods and services, kind for kind, eggs for milk, say, but it can't support a complex economy any more than olive oil can be useful as a lubricant in your automobile's engine. And money, which is a universal means of exchange, which works as a good lubricant to ease the friction between buyer, who wants the greatest value for the littlest amount of money, and seller, who wants the opposite. We also discussed what is important in a military, and that is, gentlemen, a code of honor, which is what separates the soldier from the bandit. The bandit and the soldier are both good at killing people and breaking things. The bandit does so for himself, for greed, for avarice, to loot, to rape, to murder, to burn. A soldier protects. The other image that we got from the various film clips was a sheepdog is the soldier, a wolf is the bandit, and the sheep are the poor civil human beings who are not themselves capable of protecting or defending or attacking. We're just waiting to victims. I will say one more thing, and this is in relation to Star Wars. George Lucas, with Star Wars, reformulated many classic myths. But there's one that he, as a very progressive liberal type fellow, did that I don't think he recognized. In the Old Republic, the people were protected by Jedi. In the Trade Federation, people of those worlds were protected by droids. Then, when the Republic needs an army, it gets a bunch of clones, buys them. At no point do the people of the Republic, in anything like large numbers, stand up and join their own military. People who aren't willing to do that are not going to stay free. If you protect yourself, your freedom is yours. You've earned it. You know how to defend it. It's what the writer of Beowulf called a well-armed peace. But if you rely on others to protect you, because for some reason you're too precious to fight, you're not going to stay free. Because sooner or later, the poor schmoes that you get to fight for you will turn their weapons on you and say, why on earth should I fight for you? You should be working for me. There's a quote up here that I think is worth. This is from Thucydides, the great historian of the Peloponnesian War. The nation that makes a great distinction between its scholars and its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting done by fools. What made the Roman Republic last successfully as a republic for twice as long as the American Republic has yet been around is because the Romans equated service with citizenship. And thus far in the history of the American Republic, every time the Republic has been in need, its young men have stepped forward voluntarily or have come forward when drafted to fight its nation's wars. The moment that fails to happen, we lose our wars. And Americans will awaken to the dream of conquest, being conquered, which is something that most Americans can't even imagine. A military is not optional. In a world filled with dangerous people, in a world where most nations are led by the most aggressive criminals, psychopaths in the society, most brilliant of them, a military is not optional. A lot of people ask, what is the opposite of war? And the answer that comes most readily to mind is peace. That's nice if it works out that way. But when's the last time you preached peace to a bully that was smacking you around to humiliate you or for your lunch money? They don't want peace. They want to exploit you. And if you won't defend yourself, they will. Again and again and again. The opposite of war all too often is surrender. There are worse things than dying. Slavery is one of those things. Americans once knew that. I hope we still do. Education, this thing we do here, is a necessary component of every civilization. Most civilizations do not have government schools the way we do. Most civilizations expect families to pay for the education of their own children, to transport them to school, to feed them at school. We, since the late 1800s, do all of that at taxpayer expense in a normal school. You are expected to be brought here by your folks or get here yourself because we can't afford buses. We can't afford a library. We can barely afford me and your other teachers and this lovely, luxurious place that we learn in. The government in the United States has paid for schools since basically the late 1800s, period after the Civil War, because we are an immigrant nation. And Americans had begun to worry that the children of Germans and Irish and Eastern European Jews, Italians and Portuguese and Spaniards, Russians and Poles, Lithuanians and Hungarians, yes, Germans and French, Scots and Welsh, would not necessarily intuitively understand the delicate balances of our Constitution, which is rooted in English common law and English political history. In order to make the children of immigrants into Americans, in order for this melting pot, where we have people from all over the world come here and live here and send their children to school, for America, a recognizable America, an America that is free, where the Constitution means something, the children of those immigrants need to be able to shoulder the burdens of citizenship. They need to understand what it is about America that's special. Not that Democrats are right and Republicans are bad, or Republicans are right and Democrats are bad, but what holds us all together as Americans. That's why they built public schools. Not to get you good jobs. Not to teach you important life skills. Not to make sure that you're a 21st century graduate with 21st century skills. No, to make sure, among other things, that you were literate, numerate, and that you understood your civic duty. That's why U.S. history is required to pass in any high school in this country. That's why civics is required to pass as part of any graduation program in this country, because both civics and United States history deal with this question of Americanness, what it is to be an American. And thus far it's worked. The children of the globe go to American schools, and they don't think of themselves anymore as Irish or Shona, Chinese, Japanese, Indian, Hindu, Buddhist, but Americans. We are all Americans. That special gift is the job of people like me, to make sure that you all understand your duty as an American citizen. Today's election day. Today is a day when the equivalent of Holy Communion in our civic religion is practiced, where voters willingly choose to go to the polls and decide, take part in deciding, compete to decide who our leaders should be. But none of this works if people don't appreciate. You win some, you lose some. When you win, you don't try to take all the power. You resist the urge to total victory, and you allow yourself to function within constitutional limits. Because our Constitution will prevent any side from winning once and for all. Never will our Constitution exist and Democrats suddenly be the victors, or Republicans suddenly be the victors. The whole point of the Constitution is to allow for free people to freely make decisions, including decisions between candidates of different political philosophies. None of this comes naturally to people. What comes naturally to people is monarchy or dictatorship. The guy with the guns makes the rules. So how is it that people your age learn? That's the job of schooling. One form or another. My favorite president had Alzheimer's disease before he died. Ronald Reagan. One of my favorite actors, Charlton Heston, had Alzheimer's disease before he died. My grandmother, who I love dearly, had Alzheimer's disease before she died. My mom has dementia, a slightly different form. In all cases, those people forgot themselves. In my first year of teaching here, I had a student who played for CDA's football team. He took a bad hit. Next day at school, he was all wonky. Classmates noticed it, pointed it out to me. I went over to Coeur d'Alene High School to get him out of practice and get him to a doctor. And I thank God that I was able to do that. This young man had amnesia. He forgot everything up to the present moment. He lost himself. Luckily, he still remembered English. He still remembered math. He still remembered how to read and write. But he didn't know who his mom and dad were. He didn't know who his brothers were. He didn't know who he was. From age 15 or 16, he had to rebuild a life. Surrounded by strangers who say they knew him, who say they loved him. He didn't know. Without our memory, we aren't ourselves. Our memory perpetuates our distinct personality moment by moment. Now, our bodies do a variant of this. As we age, most of the cells in our body are replaced. It's one of the reasons you're still growing. You're mostly grown, but you're not totally there yet. When you are fully grown, unlike reptiles, mammals reach a maximum size and then they stop growing, you're still going to need to regenerate cells. So, what is the degenerative disease that is old age? Well, when you replace your cells, the new cells aren't quite as sharp as the old cells used to be. That's where old age comes in. After a while, it's like making a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. It just gets blurrier. There isn't a perfect reproduction. There isn't the same vigor. So I have things wrong with me that I didn't have when I was your age. Not because I'm a bad person, although I'm not a great person when it comes to diet and exercise, but because I'm older than you. And when the time comes, the same thing should happen to you. That's normal. And what happens is eventually the copies of the old cells are so bad that you die. But before you die, you tend to shrink and shrivel up and get wrinkly skin and do all the lovely things that old people do. And that's without any of the diseases or anything like that. Your body literally forgets how to replicate its own cells. This happens once every, I think, 7 to 12 years, depending upon what part of the body you're talking about. So every 7 to 12 years, you have a new body. But it's not quite the same as it used to be. Education is here to prevent cultural amnesia. Education exists to prevent cultural amnesia. Schools are built to prevent cultural amnesia. If you don't learn what it is to be an American, how on earth are you going to be Americans when you're adults? Part of the risks in any free society, because free societies don't depend upon dictators or the guys with guns. Free societies depend upon the radical principle that uncommon virtues exist in very common people. That you and I will be willing to step up when it's necessary to do our civic duty and protect our society, protect our Constitution. And there are many ways you can do it. It's not all on the battlefield or the ballot box. But if a critical mass of people, generation by generation, never learn or learn wrongly, the country's over. You will not perpetuate what has made America unique, distinct, exceptional. And chances are, whatever is built in its place won't be as good. So that's the purpose of education. Remember, all civilizations are cultures, and all cultures are groups of people bound together by core beliefs. Education's job, whatever form it takes, whether it's private tutoring or stand there next to your dad or your mom and learn what it is to be a person, or going to school, private or public, charter or special. All of that is there so that you aren't just citizens of the world. You're American citizens. Same thing happens in Germany, in Russia, in Japan, in France, in Britain, in Spain, in Zimbabwe. You are part of a people, a nation, not built on blood, not built on soil, but built on ideals. You need to understand what that flag represents. You need to understand what the Constitution is, how it works, how it came to be. Part of my job is to teach you how it came to be. Now, the arts. Any questions, comments, or thoughts? The arts are divided into high culture and popular culture. I'm going to ask you, I'm going to set up a set of examples. You're going to tell me, based on your gut, high culture or popular culture. Ms. Durkin, comic books.
Popular.
Yep. Opera. Ballet. Say, if you're wrong, we'll laugh at you and you'll fail at life. No big deal.
Pop.
Okay, ballet, I think most people would say high culture, because fancy dancing. That's okay. Now you know. Let's see. Baseball.
Popular.
Yep. An opera about baseball.
High.
Symphonic music. Country music. Rap music.
Popular.
Or non. Couldn't resist. You get the idea. An art museum.
Popular.
An art museum?
Arts?
Art
Yeah.
museum. That's interesting. Most people would say high culture. It depends on the museum. If it's a museum of rock and roll, it's popular culture. If it's the baseball museum, it's popular culture. But if it's the Museum of Artfully Blown Glass, it's probably high culture. Okay? If you've got painters like Rodin and Godzilla, I'm sorry, that's different Rodin. Rodin and Matisse and all of them, it's probably high culture. Still, fair enough. So, what you should know is why the arts are there. The arts are there because we all have a need for beauty and meaning. And not all beauty and meaning, thank God, is to be found in politics. Politics is kind of tawdry and sometimes. So, a person has an idea, and they write a novel about it. That's either high culture or popular culture, depending upon what novel you're talking about. Lord of the Rings is interesting. It starts out, it's certainly a high culture novel, but it becomes so popular that it's popular culture. Dune, definitely high culture in concept, but popular culture in terms of its widespread knownness. And if you haven't seen the movie yet, maybe you should. It's a good one. It's only part one. The Bronte sisters, Jane Eyre, those things. That's high culture. Although you women's may very well understand those novels in a way that I don't, because I'm a guy. And I just don't get Jane Eyre. I just don't get the Bronte sisters who were writers. What is it? Wuthering Heights. I just can't. Dickens, Charles Dickens. Great Expectations, horrible. Never liked Dickens. High culture. Shakespeare. Shakespeare starts as popular culture, becomes high culture. Why? Shakespeare's trying to put butts in seats to fill the Globe Theater so that he can have money and his actors can have money. That's not his only purpose, but that's part of it. And plays, like movies, tend to be popular culture. Although you get a movie like 2001: A Space Odyssey, and it becomes high culture. Art is there for people to express themselves. Does an artist have to take into account the tastes of the audience? That's a question. Does the audience matter when an artist is coming up with his idea or her idea? Should it matter? Well, it depends. If you're dealing with popular art, like comic books, maybe it matters that your audience is not so interested in the sexuality of Superman or superheroes like Snowflake and Safe Space. On the other hand, if you're writing a book, you probably should be true to your idea. You probably should give your idea the integrity it deserves and not compromise it for the sake of making sales. That never works. You end up writing a book just to please people. And the only time I've ever known that works is Sherlock Holmes. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote Sherlock Holmes, never really liked it, but he wrote it for money. He made a lot. And I love Sherlock Holmes. A lot of people do. So art offers everyone, and that's why art is taught in schools, offers everyone the opportunity to find a voice and express themselves. Maybe when you are playing with clay or paste or paper mache or plaster or paints or chalks in art class in elementary school, it's not going to suit you. Maybe you'll find something. Maybe when you're singing in music class, you're going to hate it. Maybe you'll like it. It's like gym. Gym is there to remind you you've got bodies, and your bodies need exercise. And they need, and it's fun. It's fun to run around and be silly. It's even more fun to play kill ball when you're a kid. Dodgeball is, safe, nice, politically correct. Kill ball is what real kids do with dodgeball when the adults aren't around. At least in the creepy, weird place I grew up. Popular culture is what everyday people get involved in. Now
Could you explain kill ball?
Yeah. You know how dodgeball works?
Yeah.
Kill ball involves getting up real close and hitting the guy in the head with the ball as hard as you possibly can, throwing it. like a 2-foot range.
I think that still happens.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah.
I don't know if they call it kill ball.
No, we call it dodgeball, and then the thing is, you say, "I'm sorry, I hit you in the head," and then you do it again.
Of course. But in kill ball, you go, ah, ha, 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 because everyone knows the point of the game is violence. Violence by ball, yes.
Where I used to live, play dodgeball, people would throw the ball as hard as you can, and you would feel really bad for your teammates because you would just hear, like, on their face.
Now, understand, you really don't want to hit people in the head too hard because we have very weak temples, and you can kill someone by accident. Okay? I always got the best satisfaction by hitting people in the shoulder or in the knee, although the knee is sort of weak also. I tried not to hit people in the head unless they got me angry, at which point, you take your chances when you play dodgeball. What you don't want to do, though, is play dodgeball with a baseball. We did that once. Never again. Because you really injure people. I mean, when we did it once, one person threw, the other person got hit, and then they went to the hospital with a broken, wrist, I think. It was nasty.
Yeah.
Psychopathic children's games by Mr. Genoria. Oh, wholesome things that you learn at school. What's interesting to me is that in late 1800s in Germany or in Belgium, you had coal miners who went to the opera and who read books of philosophy. Coal miners! Not the most intellectual of folk, you might think. The line between pop culture and high culture has been much more fully drawn since we developed radio, newspapers, television, computers. Before all that, in the late 1800s, there was more highbrow and lowbrow culture, but they blended more. And people who were lowbrow would still show up at the symphony and listen to the music. And there were some operas that were definitely for lowbrow folks. It wasn't just donor class people in tuxedos. You work a long day and you want some entertainment, so you go to the opera and you watch a bunch of people. And if you speak Italian, you can understand all the things. We have a sense of beauty. We are really Homo sapiens aestheticus in that we want beauty as well as meaning. And we want truth. And sometimes the best way to truth isn't through prose, it's through poetry. Sometimes the best way to truth isn't through words, it's through visual art or dance. Okay. Now, scales of government. Scales of government. Most of the time in school, you learn that governments are on like a line. And the typical lesson that's taught is what I call the ideological scale of government. On the right, let's see, if you're at home, I think this would still be the right. It's my right. It's the people at home's right. You guys, the right would be over here from your perspective, I would assume. But let's use my perspective just for the fun of it. So on the far right, you've got fascism. On the far left, you've got communism. And right between, you've got liberal democracy. Mama bear's bed, Papa bear's bed, baby bear's bed. That's too soft. That's too hard. That's just right. Except in a scale where liberal democracy, and we're not talking Democrat Party democracy, we're talking popular government, rule of the people, that sort of thing. And liberal, as you will learn, means liberty-oriented. American conservatives are classical liberals. Today's American liberals are progressives or democratic socialists. They're not liberals because they're not oriented towards liberty, they're oriented towards something else. Some kind of communitarian ethos. But our form of government is in the middle because it has it has freedom. Fascism, no freedom. National socialism. Communism, no freedom. International socialism. Now, this is a really lousy way of looking at government for this reason. Fascism, otherwise known as National Socialism. Communism, otherwise known as International Socialism. What similarity exists between fascism and communism? Yeah?
Socialism.
Socialism! Mussolini starts life as an ardent Italian socialist. He then founds the Fascist Party. Hitler's party was Nationalsozialist Deutscher Arbeiterspartei, National Socialist German Workers' Party. What part of National Socialist don't you understand? They're two variants of the same idea. National Socialism, International Socialism. They are not the opposite sides of anything. They're practically the same. Only the goals that they tout sound different. In reality, it's much better to look at things from a functional standpoint. Not what governments say they're going to do, like pickup lines. Hey, what's your sign? Do you come here often? What's a nice girl like you doing in a place like that? Ugh. No, don't listen to the pickup lines of these smooth operators. Their pickup lines are different. But what they do is the same. So, ideology may make these two seem different. But functionally, they're both tyrannies. National Socialism, Communist Socialism, you both have police states where there are secret police whose job is to spy on you and me. In a tyranny, imagine a society with no word for no. Imagine a city with no windows or doors or curtains or shades. Everything is everyone's business. Everything is the government's business. The people belong to the government. Government belongs to the party. The party belongs to the leader. Everyone belongs to the leader. Whether you call him Hitler or Stalin, Mao or Mussolini, it doesn't matter. These are absolute totalitarian police states. They are tyrannies. There is no freedom. The government rules by naked force. Whether they have a red flag with a hammer and sickle on it that's yellow, or a red flag with a white circle and a black swastika in the middle, it is still a tyranny. You don't have the right to say no to the government. You don't have the right to say this is private to the government. Functionally, they're the same. No king or emperor has ever been as powerful as a communist or a fascist dictator. Because communist and fascist dictators have modern technology to help them control people. So if those two are both the same, and if tyranny is different from liberal democracy, which is where the people in some way, shape, or form govern themselves, what's the opposite of tyranny? Gosh, it's in your notes and it's on the board, and people are still looking confused. What, Mr. Granato? Anarchy! Anarchy! What is anarchy? You don't know. Yes.
Where there's no government.
That's right. Now, there are some children of privilege who actually think anarchy would be a good thing. Yeah, dude, government makes people resistant, so if there's no government, nobody has anything to resist, and everyone will be free to do whatever they want, and it'll be so cool, because people are basically good. You can trust people to do the right thing. Have you ever met people? Have you ever met bad people? Because they exist. And if there's no law and order, the bad people run everything. I lived in an anarchy when I lived in the Bronx. Oh, there were New York police that came through, but when the police weren't there, the gangs ran the streets. Even more so now than in the olden days. Anarchy. Somalia was in a state of anarchy during the Black Hawk Down incident. It still largely is. No government. Gangs rule everything. And it's not like the gangs are permanent. The gangs constantly change their leaders and their membership. It's just constant low-level violence and mid-level violence all the time. You think you've got a home? No. Somebody accidentally shoots an RPG through your living room window. Gone. Nothing's going to happen to them because anarchy, man. Totally cool. There's no jail. We'll defund the police. Yeah, it'll be a society where there's no crime because we no longer acknowledge that anything is a criminal act. Everything goes. And if you have the strength to harm another person, why not? If you have the strength to take from another person, what's going to hold you back? So, while the systems of government that are on this line that you learn in most classes have fascism, liberal democracy, and communism, that's just pillow talk, baby. That's just come on lines. That's the ideology, that's the ideals, the philosophy. But in reality, you got guts. You guts. No government, which is chaos. Too much government, which is slavery. And between them, there's us. We have a lot of freedom within limits. You are allowed to use your free speech. Yep. You are not allowed to say, let's go kill the president, here's how. That's against the law. We've had too many people assassinate presidents. It is actually against the law to conspire. You have free speech. You can argue for a political point of view. You know who else has free speech? Racists, sexists, homophobes, communists, anarchists. Anyone can advocate anything if they're just talking. On the other hand, when you try to practice human sacrifice or using narcotics as a part of your religious ceremony, the government's going to stop you. That's against the law. Does anyone know why it's against the law to shout fire in a crowded movie theater? This is something you should have done in civics. Yeah.
Causes chaos in people.
Yeah. Trampling. When I was a little younger than you, there was a rock concert in Connecticut. I think it was in Hartford. It may have been in New Haven. It was an open seating concert. You just paid a ticket and found wherever you wanted to sit. And partway through the concert, they rushed the stage, and several people were killed. Trampled. You shout fire in a place filled with people with limited exits, and they will crush other human beings at the doors. Up against them if the doors don't open, and underfoot if the doors do. People can be stampeded, they can be robbed of their reason, they can become absolutely ravening, stampeding wild animals. We've seen this again and again. If you provoke something like that, you are guilty of murder. Not just manslaughter, murder. You are not allowed to shout fire in a crowded theater unless there's an actual fire. And even then, what you should do is go to the fire alarm rather than going, fire! Because the fire alarm, people, they're trained in school. You get up and you quietly to the exits and you take your time. But if suddenly people are panic shouting fire and suddenly people start running, it creates a panic. It's bad. I hope you've never seen a person bruised or brutalized. I hope you will never see a person trampled to death. It's not pretty. Finally, so you'll be expected to understand the difference between the ideological scale of government and the functional scale of government. Any questions on that before I move into today's final lesson? Okay. Human society has the same basic structure from the time we developed first farms and cities up until the early 1800s. And later in some places other than Western Europe. This agrarian social order is also called feudalism. What it is how every agrarian society organizes. The Aztecs, the Incas, the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Romans, the medieval French and English, the Chinese, the Japanese, the people of Asia and India. people of the Middle East. We all use the same model. So, this pyramid represents the total population. Above this pyramid is God, or the gods, the divinity, the Godhead, the source of legitimacy, that which the people in society believe rule over the heavens and the earth. That's above the social order. Why? Because human beings are not gods. And before industrial times, everyone knew that. Below the social order, beasts and the natural world. Yep. In the story of the Garden of Eden, human beings are given dominion over the animals and over the earth. And it's not the only story that places human beings in charge of things like that. So human beings can capture and domesticate animals, breed them so that it suits us. And what have we done? We've created everything from Newfoundland dogs and Great Danes and St. Bernards on the one hand to Chihuahuas and lap poodles that are 1/3 the mass of my cats. They're all dogs. They all come from the same ancestor. They can all crossbreed. Yep. You could have a Chihuahua breed with Great Dane. It's hard to imagine. It would be hard to pull off. But it's conceivable. It could happen. All dogs are interfertile. And dogs do shape. Dogs are like clay. German Shepherds are only, 130, 140 years old? Yeah.
It's like a German Shepherd pug. It just looks like a really large pug.
Well, I suppose that's better than looking like a really tiny German Shepherd.
Its nose is a little longer, but it looks like.
With great power comes great responsibility. I think dogs are wonderful, but I really honestly wonder if you're doing anything in service by breeding a Chihuahua. And again, maybe you know Chihuahuas that are wonderful. They're wonderful little dogs. I don't know. Lap poodles. Dogs whose job it is to lay in the arms of a pretty girl or a woman or whatever, like they used to do back in the 1700s. Lap poodle. I don't know. So beasts in the natural world are placed under us in the God, where the gods are above us. Let's look at the social order. The vast majority of people, we're talking 70 to 80%. Wait, no. This actually, 70 or 80% at minimum. This can actually rise up to almost 95% of the society. Are peasants, serfs, and slaves. What is the job of peasants, serfs, and slaves? It is to work in the field. Yes, go ahead. Oh, please, if you have the answer.
It's just farming.
Yeah. Farming, ranching, growing the food. Peasants, serfs, and slaves feed everyone else. Do you know roughly what proportion of the American population are food producers, farmers? It's like 1 or 2%. It's ridiculously low. And American farmers don't just feed the United States, we feed the world. American farmers feed a number of international populations around the world. Why? You're blessed with very good land, very good farmers that have very good technology and chemistry. And all of that is useful in growing food. But before industrial times, you need at least 7 out of 10 people growing food for the other 3 out of 10 to live. Maybe you need 8 out of 10. Maybe you need 9 out of 10. Maybe you need 9.5 out of 10, which would be, 18 out of 20. It depends on where and when. The majority of people, though, and I'm talking the vast majority, are food growers, peasants, serfs, and slaves. You know what that means? There are people who go to fortune tellers to look back at their past lives. You wouldn't believe how many people were Caesar or Cleopatra. No. You were a farmer on Caesar's land. You worked for Cleopatra, growing wheat in Egypt. The odds of you being noble or royal, very, very small. Most of our ancestors come from this group, peasants, serfs, and slaves, because there were just so many of them. By the way, this side is the religious order that develops in the European Middle Ages. We'll get to that. But this 7 to 10, 70% to 95% of the people, peasants, serfs, or slaves. Okay, above them, the blue, merchants, craftsmen, and townsmen. Merchants, craftsmen, and townsmen, about 10%. These are your blacksmiths, your carpenters, your wheelwrights, your tinsmiths. These are people who have skills that make things. They can include barber surgeons or healers, hair cutters. There are people who weave. Anyone who makes a living through craft. So you've got between 70 and 95% of the population as food producers, farmers, peasants, serfs, and slaves. You've got about 10% of the population, assuming most of that, assuming about a 70 to 80% model, as merchants or craftsmen, and they tend to live in towns. Above them, the red, soldiers. Soldiers, you don't have as many soldiers as you have craftsmen. You certainly don't have as many soldiers as you have farmers. So how is it that people are kept in bondage on the land as peasants, serfs, or even slaves? How is it when you have so few people under arms? Have you ever met a soldier? Have you ever met somebody who was really good at violence? They'll keep most people in line because they're good at it. They'll intimidate them, and if there's a rebellion against lawful, righteous authority, the soldiers will put them down with bloody efficiency. Peasants' uprisings almost never work because the peasants are illiterate, disorganized, and emotional. Soldiers are none of those things. Well, they may be illiterate, but they're organized and they're disciplined. Nobles. Nobles may make up 3% of the population at most. Nobles are knights. Well, knights are sort of on the edge of soldiers to nobles. But they're knights, they're barons, they're counts, they're dukes, they're princes. Well, princes are royal for the most part. So, knights, barons, counts, and dukes. The nobles rule over part of the kingdom in nomine regius, in the name of the king. So, you have in England a duchy, which contains a bunch of counties, which contains a bunch of baronies, which contains a bunch of knightly fiefs. And so everyone lives, if you're a farmer or a craftsman, under a knight, under a baron, under a count, under a duke, under the king. And that brings us to the last group, the royals. The king, the emperor, the pharaoh, and their family. Less than 1% of the population rules over the rest. The top 1%. Yep. Princes, kings, emperors, shahs, padishahs. Human beings who are given godlike powers over the rest. Less than 1% of the population, and that's your orange group here. This basic pyramid is what works in all civilizations between the first civilizations 3,000, 4,000 years ago, like in ancient Sumer, 4,000 years ago, all the way up to the Napoleonic Wars in Europe. The American Revolution, there was this kind of society. And in Europe first, and then around the world later, industry changes and replaces this social order. To the point where now we have 1 or 2% of the American population feeding the rest of us and much of the world. That's amazing. That's actually bleeping miraculous. That so few people can do the job that so many people used to be needed for. And why do you keep people bound to the land? Because it's hard. It's a hard life when you're on the land as a peasant, a serf, or a slave. So, on this side, you've got the religious side. The laity are people who are not part of religious orders. Lay leaders are like deacons in a church. Low clergy are parish priests and monsignors. High clergy are bishops and cardinals. The pope or the high priest above that is or patriarch, is the equivalent of the king or the emperor over the church. Next time, we start on the pre-classical River Valley civilizations. And again, I hope by the end of this week to complete Unit 1 so that next week we can start Ancient Greece. Questions? Comments? Thoughts? Thank you for your attention. You may talk among yourselves until dismissal.